Have you ever wondered how societies in the past dealt with crime and punishment? Let's embark on a journey back in time to the cradle of civilization, where the earliest known forms of punishment took root. In the sun-baked lands of ancient Mesopotamia, the Code of Hammurabi was etched into stone. This comprehensive code, one of the oldest deciphered writings of significant length, laid bare a philosophy as stark as the desert from which it arose: an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. The Code of Hammurabi was not merely punitive, but also sought to maintain societal order by codifying the consequences of one's actions. If a man were to steal, he would be made to pay manifold. If he were to harm another, he would suffer a comparable affliction. In essence, it was a system where the punishment mirrored the crime, a primitive form of justice that nonetheless laid the groundwork for legal systems to come. Moving a little westward, we encounter other ancient societies like the Greeks and Romans, where corporal punishment and banishment were commonplace. Corporal punishment, the infliction of physical pain as a form of discipline, was widely accepted. It was a public spectacle, a stern warning to others who might be tempted to break the law. Banishment, on the other hand, was a punishment of isolation, a sentence that severed the ties an individual had with their community. This form of punishment was often reserved for crimes against the state, a sort of societal excommunication that left the guilty to fend for themselves in foreign lands, away from all that was familiar. But as societies evolved, their methods of punishment began to shift. The simple principles of the past gave way to more complex systems of justice, often becoming more severe and brutal. As we delve deeper into history, we'll see how punishment evolved from an eye for an eye to public displays of torture, and eventually to our modern systems of incarceration. As societies evolved, so too did their methods of punishment, often becoming more severe and brutal. As we plunge into the Middle Ages, punishments took a turn for the worse. During this period, justice was often swift and brutal, with punishments designed to deter potential criminals through sheer terror. Public humiliation was a common form of punishment. A wrongdoer would be put on display, often in the town square, for all to see their shame. They might be placed in stocks or pillories, their hands and heads locked in wooden frames. This served not only as a punishment, but also a warning to others. Mutilation was another prevalent form of punishment. Cutting off a thief's hand, blinding a spy, or even tongue removal for those who spoke against the king were all practiced with alarming regularity. These physical punishments left a lasting mark, a constant reminder of the crime committed. But the Middle Ages were perhaps most infamous for their torture devices. The rack, for instance, was a dreaded instrument of torture. Victims were tied to a rectangular wooden frame and gradually stretched until their ligaments snapped. The pain was unimaginable, and the physical damage often irreparable. Likewise, the Iron Maiden, despite its deceptively gentle name, was nothing short of a nightmare. This was a large iron cabinet internally adorned with sharp spikes. Victims were placed inside and the doors were closed, impaling them on the spikes. It was a slow, excruciating death. These brutal punishments were driven by societal and religious beliefs of the time. A crime was considered not only an offense against the victim, but also against God and the community. Punishments were therefore designed to be public, painful, and permanent, to deter others from straying from the righteous path. The Middle Ages were indeed a dark period in the history of punishment, but the worst was yet to come. In the Enlightenment era, a shift in thinking led to changes in the methods of punishment. This period, spanning from the late 17th to the early 19th century, was marked by a profound transformation in the way society approached punishment. The Enlightenment brought with it a desire to question, to reason, and ultimately, to humanize the way we deal with transgressions. Previously, physical punishments were the norm. Public executions, floggings, and the stocks were all commonplace. However, the Enlightenment prompted a shift away from these physical, often brutal methods towards a more psychological form of punishment. The focus shifted to the mind of the offender rather than the body. This shift in perspective led to the creation of penal colonies, places where convicts were sent to serve their sentences. These colonies were not just about punishment, but also about reform. The idea was to rehabilitate the offender, to mold him into a productive member of society. This was a significant departure from the previous ethos of revenge and retribution. It was about understanding the root cause of the crime and addressing it, rather than simply punishing the act. But that's not to say the Enlightenment put an end to all physical punishments. Capital punishment, the ultimate form of physical punishment, continued in many parts of the world. However, the Enlightenment also laid the groundwork for the eventual abolition of capital punishment in many countries. Critics of the death penalty argued that it was inhumane and ineffective as a deterrent, sparking debates that continue to this day. The Enlightenment era was a pivotal moment in the history of punishment. It ushered in a new way of thinking, one that favored reason over emotion, reform over revenge. But as we will see, the evolution of punishment did not stop there. The Enlightenment era brought significant changes, but the journey of punishment evolution was far from over. Fast forward to the present, where punishment is designed to rehabilitate rather than retaliate. The modern era paints a picture of a more civilized approach to punishment, but it's not without its flaws and controversies. In the heart of our system lie prisons, a stark contrast to the public spectacles of the past. They're intended as places of correction, where individuals serve time proportionate to their crimes. However, they're often criticized for being breeding grounds for crime rather than deterrence. Overcrowding is a major issue, with some facilities holding more than double their intended capacity. This leads to inhuman conditions and increased violence, casting a dark shadow over our supposedly enlightened era. And then there's the death penalty, a relic of the past that continues to spark heated debate. Some argue it's a necessary deterrent for the most heinous crimes, while others see it as a violation of the most fundamental human right, the right to life. The question of its morality, effectiveness, and fairness is one that continues to divide societies around the world. But it's not all bleak. There are alternatives to imprisonment that focus on rehabilitation and reintegration into society. Probation, for instance, allows offenders to live in their community under supervision. There's also community service, which provides a way for individuals to give back to society while learning valuable skills and lessons. A significant shift in our understanding of punishment has led to the concept of restorative justice. This approach brings together the victim, offender, and community in a process of healing and reconciliation. It's a stark contrast to the retribution-focused systems of the past, aiming to repair the harm caused by crime rather than simply punishing the offender. Today we strive for a system that is just and fair, yet the question remains, have we truly left the worst punishments in history behind? It's a question we must continue to ask ourselves as we navigate the complexities of justice in the modern world. From the brutal tortures of the Middle Ages to the modern prison system, the path of punishment has been a long and winding one. We've journeyed together through the ages, observing the evolution of punishment in its various forms. In the dawn of punishments, we saw codes of law etched in stone, and justice served with an iron fist. The Hammurabi Code of ancient Babylon, for instance, was a testament to the eye for an eye principle that ruled the era. Then we ventured into the darkness of the Middle Ages, where punishment was a public spectacle executed with chilling creativity. From the rack to the Iron Maiden, the intention was not just to punish, but to instill fear and deterrence. The Age of Enlightenment brought a shift. As our understanding of human nature evolved, so too did our approach to punishment. The focus moved from physical torment to psychological punishment, and the idea of reform started to take root. The introduction of prisons as we know them today marked a significant change in our perspective towards punishment. In the modern era, we saw a further evolution. The prison system, despite its flaws, represents an attempt to balance punishment with rehabilitation. The aim is not just to penalize, but also to provide an opportunity for change and growth. Throughout this journey, we've seen how punishment has been used as a tool, not just for justice, but for control, for deterrence, and for reform. Each era's methods of punishment have reflected its understanding of justice, its values, and its fears. In reflecting on this history, we must grapple with some challenging questions. How does punishment serve justice? How can it deter crime and yet offer a chance for reform? These are complex issues with no easy answers. In the end, the history of punishment is a mirror reflecting our society's values and beliefs. As we look forward, we must ask ourselves, what will the future of punishment look like?